Alafia. I'm Dr. Gloria Lattimore Peace, host and producer of OmniU Presents the H3O Art of Life show. The title of today's show is No Love Thy Neighbor, Love Thyself. I almost gave it the wrong title. This is not my day for being on television. I'm glad to greet my guests, however, and I'd like to greet Carl Wolf, who is the Executive Director of Respond Now, and Eugene Dumas, who is former Executive Director. Who is the Executive Director now?
The present Executive Director is Mrs. Patricia Morley.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Center for Multicultural Communities. Okay. So the first thing I think I should do is I should learn about you, and my viewing audience should learn about you, what it is you do and why you do it, and how long you've been doing and what effect you think it has had. So now that's 4 questions that are already out there on the table. So you will start, if you like, Mr. Dumas, telling us about the center, because you told me already that it had a different name when it started.
Yes. The Center for Multicultural Communities originally was known as Healing Racism. And that name came about because in 1999, in the 1990s, Black people began to move into the area where we now live around Flossmoor, Country Club Hills, Olympia Fields. And the residents in the area wanted to make sure that the blacks moving into the area were welcomed. They didn't want them to be scorned in any way and be treated unwelcome. So they got together and they formed the Center for Healing Racism. After a few years, as a matter of fact, in 2007, the organization started in 1999. That's when it received its charter. In 2007, after a few discussions, it was decided that the organization was more inclusive than just dealing with racism, but dealing with discrimination of any kind. And the idea was to foster egalitarian in every area. And so that's how the name change came about. I became the executive director in 2007. I served there until just a month and a half ago. As you know, when you are married, you don't always do things your way. If you're going to be successfully married, you must make adjustments. My wife wanted me full-time. Instead of sharing me with the organization, she felt that really I had served long enough. Originally, before that, I was a 40-year educator with the Chicago Board of Ed. I finished my career as a principal in 2002. What the organization does, we now conduct workshops. We conduct workshop to bring about really cultural and racial harmony. There's no reason for discrimination. There's no legitimate reason for discrimination for one group of people to think they are superior to another one, or for another group to feel inferior, because we are all just human beings. It was known many years ago, way back before the first century, by theologians that there's just one race, the human race. Science caught up in 2000 under the direction of Dr. Francis Collins, and they concluded, yes, the theologians were right. There's only one race, the human race. And so we conduct workshops to help people come to that realization.
All right. Well, that's a good opening statement, and I appreciate it. Carl Wolf, what do you have to give an account of yourself?
Yes. My name's Carl Wolf. I'm the Executive Director of Respond Now, which is a social service agency in Chicago Heights that provides health, hunger, and housing services to people in need. The far south suburbs, Chicago Heights, people generally think of the suburbs as an area that is not necessarily in need. However, we know based on statistics and work that's been done by a number of institutions, for example, Brookings Institute, has shown that poverty has increased at a much faster rate in the suburbs than it has in the city over the last 10 or 15 years or so. And Respond Now, and so we know, we see it every day in Chicago Heights, that there's a great level of poverty of the people who are struggling to bring food into the home, to keep a roof over their head, a high level of homelessness. And so Respond Now is there to provide services and to be a beacon of light, to be a place of comfort for families and individuals in need, and to provide them with those basic things that everybody needs in order to survive on a day-to-day basis. I mean, we think about health and medicine. We provide medication for people who are in need of medication. We think about hunger and food, and we provide a food pantry and other means by which people can access food. And then we think about housing and the need to have a roof and utilities. And Respond Now provides rental assistance and utility assistance and helps people move into homes, helps people prevent their home from being foreclosed. And we even help the chronically homeless, people who have been on the streets for a long time, get back into an apartment so they can stabilize their lives. So for 50 years, Respond Now has been serving the far south suburbs, Chicago Heights, and the 22 surrounding communities with a sense of love and compassion and great joy in being allowed to serve this community, that the community looks to us as a place of safety, and that's a privilege for us that we take very, very seriously as we live in brotherhood and sisterhood on a day-to-day basis. So
I love the way that this is dovetails, because you got an award for a Fair Housing Award.
Yes.
So that means that you were involved in housing, not just in issues of differences, perceived or otherwise, that people have with each other. What did your organization do that had some bearing or an effect on housing?
Well, what we did was, in our workshops, the workshops that we did were very inclusive. Some of them, one workshop is 15 hours, and we conducted workshops in which we spoke to state officials, local residents, and others about the harmful effect of housing discrimination, because that fits in with this thing of systemic racism. What we did was, we showed them, we examined in discussion with them the ill effects of discrimination in housing. For example, it went beyond race. As you probably heard, there were organizations and people discriminating of people because of family structure. If it was a woman and just children, some realtors were saying outright, I will not rent to them. We had situations where, of course, color. We also had situations where, and we dealt with those, where people were refused rental because they had a disability. As one example, there was one gentleman who attempted to rent. He was a white gentleman. He attempted to rent from a realtor who was white. And then he flat out refused to rent to him. And when he asked why, he said, you have too much baggage because you are on dialysis, therefore I won't rent to you. And these kinds of things. So we conducted workshops explaining to governmental officials and residents, realtors as well,
to influence policy,
that this is terrible.
Right.
This is totally unacceptable
Right.
in an American society.
Right.
People should not be discriminated against for any reasons.
Now you listen to this. It's enough to deal with poverty, especially the poverty that is imposed upon people because of discrimination. You can't get employment, or you can't get employment that's adequate to be able to live indoors on, as a paid, the security deposit you have to have up front, and the advance rent that you have. You can't even get into a place to live on a permanent basis.
Yes.
And so you have discrimination, and you have poverty, and you have these two things going on simultaneously. And it is because some people somewhere have chosen you as targets to be exploited, and to be deprived.
Yes.
This is where your work is to deal with policy making, to try to bring issues to the attention of people in position to alter policies.
Yes.
Your work is to to help the people who are suffering as a result of these policies. Now, you may take a very long time before you can change or modify some policy or some practice, but your clients can't wait.
Right.
There, you said in your literature says essential services, meaning food, clothing, shelter, medical care. And I feel this very strongly because as a young married woman with a large family, we had the worst time trying to live in decent, safe housing because landlords did not want to rent to you if you had more than one child. My husband was a postal employee. He was a veteran of the armed services, a career postal employee. He had a good job. He had good credit. We were married people, but we had more than one child. So trying to find housing that was safe, because some slumlord would rent you a house for an exorbitant rent, and you'd have to be afraid to put your children to bed because it was a fire trap. And how often did you read in the papers about some family having a fire because they had a space heater or some other kind of situation? So I feel this very strongly because it's been a part of my experience. The housing discrimination based not just on race or culture, but based upon some particular peculiarities that homeowners, landlords had. How do you deal with that when you're trying to house people who don't even have good credit, who don't even have jobs that pay well?
Right.
What do you do?
Well, so let me just take a couple steps back, and I think we need to be very, and I know and you know that the history of discrimination was not peculiar or an instance of individual acts, but it was a deliberate attempt promoted and supported by the United States government to redline people into certain districts in order to, as far as they were concerned, maintain the cost of housing. So this discrimination, I'm probably taking your words, is systemic. It is part of the system to maintain, I think, segregation. The other thing I wanted to do, before I answer your question and take a step back, is validate and understand and help people cherish the strength that they have in living under such impoverished and racist conditions. And really, poverty and racism are not separate. I mean, they're a tied thing. But that what the families and the single mothers and the homeless people that we see, what they go through on a day-to-day basis, I have no idea. I couldn't live. Me personally, the strength that they must have to be able to live with that stress of not knowing where they're going to end up or what craziness is going to occur in their lives because they live under such poverty conditions. And I really think that there's a stress or a mental health detriment component to racism that
Absolutely.
It beats people down.
Absolutely.
What we do, it's a struggle. Particularly when we're working with the homeless, or the chronically homeless who don't have good credit or have bad credit, and who don't have a job, and an agency like ours, like Respond Now, says, look, we're going to get this family off the streets, or we're going to get this vulnerable individual off the streets, and we're going to pay their rent. We're going to give them a head start, and we have to convince landlords that, that they should take this risk, as far as they're concerned, let alone all the other discriminatory aspects of their business, such as source of income. They say, well, we're not going to rent to you because you get a housing choice voucher, or or all the other things that you were saying. But it's a struggle for us to find affordable housing in the south suburbs, let alone the city. It's a struggle for us to find affordable, decent housing, that
Safe
safe,
housing.
and that ultimately somebody will be able to afford themselves. Well, that's where we say the word affordable, I guess. Because if you have an individual who is receiving Social Security disability, they're 50 years old or 60 years old, and they get $700 a month in income from Social Security disability, where are they going to find a place where they can, the standard is 30% of your income, that you should pay no more than 30% of your income towards your housing costs. So if you're bringing in $700 a month, that's $210 that you should pay on your housing costs. That's not available anywhere. This country politically has to make a commitment to providing housing for people at rates that they can afford. And unfortunately, we are a long ways off from that.
Now, when you have workshops, you say you have workshops that last as long as 15 hours.
Yes, it depends.
How do you get the people who can make a difference? Because it's one thing to have me as a sympathetic resident of the community want to come in and just sit down and commiserate along with you, but how do you get the people who can make a difference, who can do more than sympathize? How do you get them to come and listen to you for 15 hours?
Well, what we did, some of the workshops are that long. We just finished, year before last, 7 workshops for the state of Illinois, along with another organization, a sister organization known as Diversity, Inc. We conducted 7 workshops, and they were called affirmative housing, affordable affirmative housing.
Okay.
And we showed the organizations that what was happening, and we made suggestions through interactive situations, what could be done. For example, the federal government passed the Fair Housing Act back in 1968. Yet, when we did our workshop, there were more complaints of housing discrimination than ever. Further research showed that there are so many, the federal government can't possibly get to all of the cases. And apparently, the people who are doing this know this. For example, I guess I shouldn't be calling suburbs, I won't call, a suburb southwest of here. The man openly said, I won't rent to certain people. I don't care what the federal government says. It was in the newspaper. Chances of him being confronted are very small because there's so many.
There's no enforcement.
There's nobody to enforce it. Occasionally there is enforcement. A suburb just very close to both of us, for example, there was a case of steering. A black family had gone and bought a home from a family in that particular village. Contract was finished, they put down a down payment. An agreement was signed. Then a white family came along. Excuse me. The house was sold they reneged on the contract with the black family. The house was sold to a white family for $9,000 less. Unfortunately, the black family, for the seller, the black family was a very astute family. They sued them in court and won their case. But most of it will not ever get to court. We had undercover video where people with the same qualification, white, black would go. The black family would go, the black person would go and apply, and they would tell, oh, we have no vacancies, but I just read the advertisement. Oh, we filled it already. Behind that, a white person would go and rent the same place. So it was cases, and that information was submitted to the federal government. And we talked to governmental officials and some residents that, look, there needs to be a more vigorous effort to eradicate this kind of thing because it's going on. But the cases continue to increase.
I'm not surprised because I agree with you and know it to be my experience that it is the systemic, and it is in the hearts of men as well, so men and women. This whole idea, the whole notion that you can have something called racism when race itself is a fraudulent concept, when there is one human race, and I don't know where all this notion that there could be all these different subdivisions, but we got all the colors, so we got all the races from all the colors. Kind of interesting just to look at that part of it. So you have something that is called racism, which I don't like because I don't think it's racism. I think it's more than that. Because if there's only one race and it is the human race, then what you have is anti-humanism,
Exactly.
not racism.
Right.
These are people who are opposed, systems and policies that are opposed to human life. Some human life is unacceptable. Some human life is not even characterized as human life. I've seen terms like subhuman.
Yes.
I've seen terms like savages, which mean the same thing as subhuman.
Yes.
And I've seen them not only in fiction, but I've seen it in nonfiction. I've seen these in Hollywood movies, and I've heard it in classrooms where professors brought forward the same kind of rhetoric. So you have some people who have decided that they are going to have a code of conduct which is against humanity. Just for me, that's what that means. So what this means is, on the one hand, you have to help people who are victimized by that behavior. On the other hand, you have to try to change people so that they won't continue to contribute to it, because some people contribute to it inadvertently. Some people are overt. They go out to do it. The landlord who says, I will not rent, means to do it. Then there are other people who just turn a blind eye. They just don't see it, and they don't protest it, and they don't care about it as long as their privilege is maintained. As long, silently, they don't want it to happen, but they're too cowardly to say it. So they just let other people do the dirty work, and they benefit from the dirty work. So what do we do besides make our voices heard and take action and do all that we can while we live to restore justice? Because we all would have to agree that this is unjust.
Sure. Yes. What we have to do is this. First of all, we have to understand the problem, the genesis of it. This is what we see today. Many people, because of this man's status, will not really tackle it. But this is really social Darwinism in action. Since the publishing of The Origin of the Species and the Survival of the Fittest and Other Inferior Races, that caught on, because the country originally, before it became a country, the idea was all men are created equal. But there was, as a result of that, one of the things that Darwin said, that there are certain people you should not help. You should not help the weak because that interferes with natural selection. And people expanded that. Now, supposedly, that was not what Darwin intended, but when you read his direct statements, you tend to say, I think his disciples picked the cue up. And so then you get this thing, because traditionally, people came to this country because they wanted fairness. Probably in 7th grade, though, well, none of you as old as I am, the idea was people came for religious freedom and fairness for everybody. Nobody was looked down upon. That didn't come about until around 1630, because when this country first really, when this area, wasn't even before a country, became integrated, people got along just fine. Then that kicked in, because before the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence was formed, the formulators of that looked into the Bible, and it talked about, I like your term, neighborliness, being a good neighbor. Well, but there were those who saying, well, no, not those people. After all, we're not even sure they're human. And they referred to some of the things that Darwin wrote in his Disciples and so forth and so on. And I don't want to take up the whole show, they came up with the idea that there are certain people that are inhuman, subhuman, and some people are superior and some are inferior. When you talk about inferior people, as he did in his title, people felt justified in that. And the Christians stood back and said, oh, no, this isn't right. But they were in the minority. And so we got what we get today. I know
Well,
I'm
I
skipping a
don't
lot
know
of
if we
stuff
can
in
let-
between.
I don't know if we can let the Christians off the hook.
Yes.
'Cause-
Let me point this out. The real Christians, you can call yourself anything. People can call themselves anything, but that doesn't make them that. For example, just recently, one young man decided that human beings are very cruel, so he no longer wanted to be a human being. So he went to a plastic surgeon, spent thousands of dollars to have the plastic surgeon make him look like an elk, because he wants to be an elk. While in reality, is he an elk? No, he's not. He's still a human being. People do all kinds of crazy things. And so what we have many people who take the title Christian. Sometimes it's economically good, but how do they live their lives? Are they good neighbors, like the title spoke? If you are really a neighborly person, you are exhibiting Christian characteristics. That is, you treat everybody like you want to be treated, not the way they treat you. Like, I grew up in a family in Alabama where we were treated very cruelly, but the family's philosophy was that the Dumas family is not a family that tolerates hate. When horrible things are done against us, we hate the act, but not the person. To hate the person is more damaging to us than it would be to the person who perpetrated the hate. Now, a lot of folks will say that's a crazy philosophy, but it works. Because when you encounter the kinds of stuff that we're facing in society, you have the coping skill to deal with it.
Well, on some level I could probably agree with you, and what the level on which I could agree with you is I'm not going to let you use my energy. So it isn't because I don't deplore and detest what you're doing, and perhaps deplore and detest you as well. I'm just not going to let you take my energy, because I can use my energy for better things. But the thing is that there's so much history, and if we started to get into it, we'd just be here for a longer time than we have. But there's so much history to indicate that the indigenous population that was here were not in some place called America, because there wasn't any. They were here, and they were not being Indians, because they weren't. They were Algonquins, or they were Navajo, or they were whatever their kinship name was. So you have some settlers who come not just for religious freedom, But some of the settlers I've read were kicked out of where they were because they were scoundrels there.
Exactly.
And they were financed to leave.
Right.
If you go away from here, we will give you money. You get on the ship and leave, because they were not good citizens of where they were, and they turned out not to be good citizens
Here.
Well, they couldn't be citizens because they were immigrants.
Yeah.
But these people who came over and met people who were pretty much peaceful people decided that they could, I guess, take advantage of their hospitality. I'll just put it like that. To the extent that they, let's say, encroached upon their rights to the extent that now those people are on reservations, and the settler, the descendants of those people are on reservations, and the descendants of the immigrants or the settlers are now telling those people what to do and where to go and what they can have. So we've seen what can happen even when people don't read Darwin. We've seen what can happen if people with an inclination decide to behave in inhuman ways. So what we have to do is recognize that happened, it's happening, and it probably won't cease unless some action is taken. Unless, of course, we meet the need where we see the need, and unless, of course, we do what we determine, we identify the sources of all of this, the places in the system from which this is flowing, because this is a full-time job. This is just to know the schemes. There are people who apparently have nothing better to do than to think of ways to deprive people of their rights to life, liberty, and happiness. And when they said all men are created equal, you have to first get in the category of men. And you can't get in that category if you're going to be defined as 3/5 of a man.
Right.
So, so we try to read it and say, well, they did say, all men are created equal, but they didn't count you.
Exactly.
They weren't, you were eavesdropping. They were not talking to you. So those of us who know that this is not right, it is not just, it is unfair, and when you talked about the mental effects of being constantly in a bind, of being constantly under the stress of uncertainty, of insecurity. Like you said, you don't know what you would do. Believe me, you don't want to know.
We can learn something.
You do not want to know what you would do if you were sleeping under the bridge on Wacker Drive. You do not want to know when you go to bed at night. You don't want to know what it would be like if it were raining on a cardboard box, which was the only cover that you had as shelter. So I have to read this. I have to read this quote right now. My friend Carol Walker sent me this morning. She's with the Communiversity, which is at Northeastern Illinois University. She said, envision your sons, daughters, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, cousins, and other loved ones. Then imagine them going through the same hardships that you and others are going through now. Imagine them going through these hardships as young adults, as middle-aged adults, as elders. Is this the legacy you want to leave? If the answer is no, stand up once again and make the world a better place. It is our responsibility to do this. Now that's her quote. And she added to it something from Frantz Fanon. Each generation must out of relative obscurity, discover its mission and fulfill it or betray it. This is our generation. I'm not in exactly the same generation that you are, but we are here. We must discover why. What is our mission? What is our purpose? Are we here to decorate? Are we flowers? Are we here as ornaments to just decorate the earth and make it look better? Or do we have a responsibility to our fellow man, to our neighbors? Do we? And if we have a responsibility, what is it? And what, therefore, there's a wonderful book called How Shall We Live? How Then Shall We Live, Knowing We Will Die? So how then shall we live? Since we are somebody's neighbor and someone is our neighbor, what then shall we do?
I have a deep kind of respect for the forces of change throughout history. I kind of mentioned this when we first met each other.
Right.
You know, change will always happen. Change is constant. And in the past 600 years, 700, 800 years, there's been a great advance in humankind. We have more things. We live, for many of us, we live in
Material advance?
materially and physically and emotionally. We're safer spiritually, and yet, you know, the horrible thing is that we have this huge capacity to create, and yet the things that we create are not distributed equally. I mean, that we know. I mean, nobody should be hungry in this world. So, but change is always happening, and in order to make change, we have to fight. We absolutely have to fight, and we have to have a long-term view, because change happens slowly. But when I think about our forefathers or our ancestors and the people that I claim as my ancestors, like, you know, the Haitian slaves who kicked out the French for their freedom. It was bloody. It was really bloody. They fought, but they were fighting for their freedom. And when we think about, you know, Frederick Douglass and John Brown is somebody that I really, you know, I have great admiration for that man. He fought. You know, people think he was crazy, but he was very deliberate, and he fought for freedom, for people, for him, not only for slaves, but I think for freedom for himself and his family and white men of this country at that time, and the Union soldiers and the freed slaves who fought, and throughout history, the Jews that fought the Nazis in the ghettos, right, and the soldiers, the American soldiers who went to Spain in the 1930s to fight against the Franco-fascists, right, when Spain was going through their civil war. These American citizens, they were called the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. They didn't have to go to fight that war, but they went to fight for change and for a better life, for freedom, for the Palestinian youth who are, you know, fighting with their slingshots and however they're fighting for their freedom, for love. And so I think that we have to fight. That change happens in many ways. Change happens through discussion and debate, and but at some point, change happens through conflict as well. I mean, that's just something that we can't avoid. It's something that is as the forces of man and woman change over time, right? When we went from the pre-Enlightenment days of kings and serfs and feudal lords, and this is just European history, so bear with me. I don't know Asian or South American or African history so well, but as they went from the kings and the feudal lords were in control to what we know today as the nation state and capitalism, right? There was There was war in America to make that happen. The French Revolution made that happen. The English Revolution made that happen. So these changes, you know, I'm not sitting here saying that we should make war, but we have to fight. We have to put
You have to
ourselves at a
stand
risk.
up.
And let me just say one more thing, because I don't want to go long here. In the history of oppression, I think racism is fairly new. I think that previously oppression was based on what class you were born into, right? Like if you were a serf, and again, this is European history. If you were a serf, you were a serf, and you stayed a serf. And if you were a king, if you were royalty, you stayed royalty. Romans had slaves, but it wasn't based on race. It was based on who they conquered, right? It was based on what areas. So there's always been oppression. But racism as an oppressive tool, I think, is new with the advent of capitalism. That when man and woman let go of they allow capitalism, you now can move in your station in life. You may not be born a king, but you can become rich, right? Because, you know, we can do anything now because that's what capitalism allows us, and it has. Many people have grown to be extremely wealthy and do great things, but there needed to be a new oppression, a reason why they could justify the enslavement
They
of
needed
Africans
a new commodity.
and the genocide of the Indians.
You have to have, if you're going to plunder, you have to have something to plunder.
You have to justify it.
Well, you can always write something in a document to justify. What I'm saying is, if you look at the wealth of Africa, for example, then you can justify,
Right.
if you are capitalist and you want to own everything, if you have an insatiable appetite for possessing things, then you can justify attempting to gratify the insatiable appetite that you have by taking things from others based on the fact that these others should not have them
Because they're
subhuman,
Right.
and it was an accident or something that they should possess oil and diamonds and all of the natural resources that are necessary to support human life. So you can, when you have the inclination and the nature to exploit people and exploit human beings, you can figure out how to pretty much figure out how to do it. It doesn't take long, apparently, because it has happened. And we saw the result of it's happening, how we justified the inhumanity to man.
But the exploitation of man and woman is based on the growth of power and riches and material, right? I mean, that's why I'm going to exploit you, because I want you to do X, Y, and Z. And if that's taken away, if we create and build for the sake of building community, if we take that incentive of material power away, then I think racism will.
Well, if you're talking about avoiding war, you just started one. If you talk about taking away the material basis of privileged life, then you are really talking about if you're trying to start a revolution on your own.
Well, not on my own.
But the thing that we have to recognize, you know, of course we have to know the source, because we don't need to let it keep coming from there. We need to go to the root of a matter always to really do something about it. But ultimately what we're dealing with is the fallout or the residual or the result of the consequences of this code of conduct in the human community.
But it continues. It's not
it-
really the
it is-
fallout, it's the extension.
But I agree with you that a piece of paper is not what turned captives into slaves, nor is it what freed so-called slaves, because I maintain that these people were always captives. They were never slaves. They were free on their own land, and you don't go to some place and take free people and name them slaves. That was your point. You know, you can call yourself anything you want to call yourself. You also can call other people anything you want to call them. It does not make them that. So free people were what were renamed or misnamed slaves. These were free people. These were free people who were captured and who were held in captivity and then reduced to the serfdom that you talked about, from which they were never supposed to escape. So we got a lot of misnomers. We got a lot of names for things that don't really name the things, and a lot of names for things that don't really have a reality of their own. But when you talk about trying to convince people to give up privileges, to give up the right to satisfy their appetite or their inclination to discriminate, you know, that's a hard job.
It is, but we have to be tenacious in attempting to do so. We mentioned a lot of, there are fighters, there always has been. We can't forget people like Harriet Tubman, to mention some women, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Beecher Stowe. For example, Harriet Beecher Stowe, as we all know, you
Uncle
probably
Tom's
went to very fine high school, so you probably read Uncle Tom's Cabin back there, and you might have even read The Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin, which is 900 pages, because when she wrote that book, she was accused of lying. So as a Christian lady, she said, I can't lie. So she went back and documented everything called The Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin, which is 900 pages, where she actually has documents. And then you have other people who stepped in the fore. What we have to do is continue to fight, but we have to do so in an organized manner. And groups that are not the dominant groups must be mentally tough in order to fight it. Dr. Claude Anderson, in his two books, one called Black Labor, White Wealth, and the other one called Powernomics, spoke of the fact that there needs to be a think tank that's ongoing. He said one of the reasons why we have been any more successful in eradicating racism and the other ills that go with it is we are always acting in an ad hoc fashion. We go into hibernation as long when there's a bit of détente or peace, and we don't keep planning like the people who bring about subjugation. There's a constant, meticulous planning on the part of those who are the oppressors, whereas the victims are only reacting in an ad hoc fashion. Whereas he said there ought to be an ongoing think tank.
A proactive.
How do we throw this off? How do we end housing discrimination? How do we end discrimination in education and even the medical field? How do you do that? There ought to be people who are sophisticated and intelligent and constantly working on that. How do we persuade those who are the oppressors to be neighborly, as your title? I love that title, because to be a neighbor means you treat somebody like you want to be treated. I won't think, say, or do anything against you that I wouldn't want done to me, because I recognize the fact that you are human. And that's what we talk about in the Center for Multicultural Communities. You mentioned that it's hard. Oh yes, it's hard, because people don't like to change. Change make people uncomfortable. Change is uncomfortable, and you have to be intentional about it. But we have to be persistent. And what we've seen, and I'm finished with that, we've seen people upon coming to that realization, making change. I'll always remember a white couple, a young couple, they're about 55 years old. At the end of the workshop, the man said, you know, I'm so sorry. All my life I've been a racist and I didn't know it. His wife chimed in. Before this workshop, I was so afraid of black people that if I saw a black person on the street that I was going to meet, I crossed over and went to the other side of the street. I'm ashamed of myself. That's a transformation. I remember a black lady writing a letter. She worked on a campaign, political campaign, and she lived with a white lady who also worked. She mentioned, before this workshop, there's no way I would have worked with a white person. There's no way I would have lived in this white person's house, ate with this person, worked with this person. But as a result of the workshop, my eyes were open. So, but it takes mental toughness. It takes resisting the culture around you that is, deleterious, that is injurious to people, and thinking, how would I like for this to happen to me? Once you do that, you see things a whole lot different. And you know what that takes? A change of the heart.
Love thy neighbor.
That's right.
Love thy neighbor. It's very
Love
important.
thyself.
It's the first step.
Right.
At the Unitarian Universal Community Church in Park Forest, they're going to start a kind of conversation. And some of these things seem mild and ineffective, but people have got to start talking to each other. You don't even know your neighbors very often. They're anonymous to you because you go and come, they go and come, and you don't meet and you don't know. If we need to get acquainted,
Yes.
and we need to fight and be peaceful.
That's
Not either or, but
Right.
both and.
right.
Because we've got to make things better unless we want to see our children go through the kinds of hardships that we've experienced. Gentlemen, thank you so
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
I've enjoyed every minute of this,
Thank
and
you.
I would have enjoyed another hour had not some unexpected things happened.
Yes.
But that's life.
I'm sorry about that.
It's all right. I love you anyway.
But we invite you to come to our workshops. And
I will.
the one, we have another one coming up at the Park Forest Library. The exact date I don't remember, but Monica, who goes with you, and
Right.
the others and Darlene will fill you in on that. You may have our brochure.
Undoubtedly, yeah.
Yeah.
So when are
And
you
it's
having
free?
an open house?
It's a good question. We don't usually have open houses, so it's
How
something
do
we should
people know that you have your services?
Oh, we have a website. We've been in the community for 50 years.
Well, how do
So-
people who don't have
Who
an
don't.
urgent need to fulfill an essential element in their lives
Yeah.
know that you're there?